discussion on how South Africans are feeling towards some of their needs not being met, whether it's the crime front or unemployment. Joining me, political analyst Moetsi Mbeki, recently warning that room for politicians, professionals and civil servants of a possible uprising. There is room for that due to the governing party's failure of certain things. Mr. Mbeki, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I mean, you've been watching throughout the entire morning. Let's start with this particular case, Laxton Tlantla. I mean, what is this a symptom of? I mean, on the one hand, you have people scrambling for jobs and pointing in one direction to illegal foreigners. You have the issue of drugs emerging there. And I must tell you, some very impressive support around Lux Dlamini. What's your take on that matter, Mr. Mbeki?
Well, you know, there are a number of mistakes that the ANC government made during its 28 years in power. And these mistakes are now catching up with the government. One of the mistakes that the ANC made right at the beginning of its getting into power was to decide not to really control the borders of South Africa. One of the first decisions the ANC made was to stop the electrified fence that the previous regime had installed. So they pulled down the electric fence. Secondly, they removed the army from border control and said border control is a police matter. Now, South Africa has 3,000 kilometers of land border. And land border has no roads. So you need off-the-road vehicles, which means you need military vehicles to control your borders. The ANC government removed the army from border patrol and decided that this is a police matter, let's leave it to the police. The consequence is what then happened. And the third part of it, which is equally important, is the ANC government collaborated with ZANU-PF in destroying effectively the economy of Zimbabwe, because they both did not want an opposition party formed by civil society to take power in Zimbabwe. So these three actions came together. The Zimbabwe, by destroying the economy, ZANU-PF, by destroying the economy of Zimbabwe, a huge flood of people flooded into South Africa looking for jobs. And by not controlling the border and effectively allowing the border not to be controlled, then it was easy for this flood. And now the consequence of this is that poor people from Zimbabwe flooded into poor areas in South Africa, which are the townships and the informal settlements. And this is the outcome of what you get. That's one side of the story. Yep. The other side of the story, Devon, is the Mozambique government has been importing heroin from South Asia and on selling it. This is Frelimo. And on selling it to South Africa. Again, the South African government has done nothing about stopping Frelimo selling heroin into South Africa. And this heroin ends up with young people, especially in the townships. So all these errors of the ANC government are now, as they say, chicken are coming home to roost.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, those are damning set of circumstances there, Mr. Mbeki. But let me ask you, if you look to tomorrow, where Stats SA will tell us what happened with jobs over the last 3 months of the year, you look at what happened last week with the president and his team showing the bells and whistles, huge impressive numbers on the amount of investment that's been secured, and you try and reconcile this with everything you said, most likely you're going to get a worsening unemployment number being announced tomorrow, and I suppose that won't be a surprise.
Oh, it won't be a surprise at all. You know, the big numbers that the president was talking about at that investment conference, the experts in our media, in Business Day, for example, have already shown that these numbers are more imaginary than real. The level of investment in South Africa, if these numbers were for real, the level of investment in South Africa today stands at about 13% of gross domestic product. If those numbers were for real, the level of investment would be much higher than that. It shows that there is no investment in South Africa. So all the razzmatazz that's going on at the Sandton Convention Center is all smoke and mirrors and publicity for the president, but it is nothing. It produces no results for the real economy of South Africa, which is why unemployment in this country keeps growing.
Mr. Mbeki, why can't we get corruption right in this country, or anti-corruption efforts?
You see, one of the major drivers of corruption in South Africa is black economic empowerment. And the government was warned, and I was one of the people who warned them, that black economic empowerment is going to lead to corruption. For starters, you're going to get black people fronting for so-called white companies. And that is the beginning of corruption. And then you are going to get these preferences that you give. How do you give one preference to one person and not to another black person? And as long as you have these preferences, the black economic empowerment, preferential procurement, etc., you cannot eradicate corruption. It will stay with us. But of course, our president has been the primary beneficiary of black economic empowerment, so he's staying with black economic empowerment, notwithstanding that it is a key driver of corruption in South Africa.
Now, I just want to finally reconcile this with some of the pieces you've written around the so-called uprising. You know, talk to us about 7-8 years ago. You've seen this flourishing in Northern Africa, in Tunisia, etc. You still say that is very, very possible to happen now in South Africa. And what are the main catalysts for that?
Well, you see, the South African population, when you have nearly half of your population almost unemployed, you are going, especially young people. The latest estimate is that young people between the ages of 15 and 24 are unemployed. So how are these young people going to keep occupied? So they constitute the powder keg that is waiting to explode. And it can be triggered by anything, can be triggered as it was last time by the arrest of Jacob Zuma. It can be triggered by the arrest of this young gentleman, Nhlanhla Lux Dlamini, that could trigger another explosion, because we're sitting with this powder keg that is waiting to explode in South Africa.
Can I come in there and ask you, my apologies, Mr. Mbeki, can I ask you on that point, do you think we're going to see this spread nationwide? And if, can we stop it? Should we stop it? The operation I speak about.
Well, the Operation Tudula is a spontaneous response by citizens who feel threatened by the flood of heroin into the country, which the government is doing nothing about. If anything, the government is going to Mozambique the South African government, to protect the people who are exporting heroin into South Africa. So it's going to be very, very difficult to stop this kind of a citizens' movement from spreading. Whether you think it's lawful or unlawful, you are not going to stop it as long as the fundamentals that lead to its creation are there. It will continue to spread in this country.
All right. Well, thanks very much indeed for that insight. Political analyst Moetsi Mbeki there talking to us about Operation Dudula and what he sees as government failures in many instances.